Friends, welcome back to Cultural Savage. This week, I have the absolute pleasure of introducing Jessica Kantrowitz. Did I say that correct?
Yes, very good.
Okay, good, good. Now, Jessica is an author. She is a theologian, and she lives in Boston, Massachusetts. She writes about theology, culture, social justice, and chronic illness, including her own struggles with depression and migraines. Her writing has been featured in places like Sojourners, Think Christian, The Good Men Project, and our Bible app. The Long Night, Reading and Stories to Help You Through Depression is her first book, and it is absolutely a beautiful, beautiful thing. Jessica, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
Thanks. I'm pretty good. It's yeah, I'm in a transitional time, so
Yeah.
I'm a little
Well,
bit up in the air, but in a
that
good way, I think.
I feel like since the pandemic hit, we're all in this perpetual transition mode, and
That's true.
everything is kind of up in the air. So I'm sure a
Yeah.
lot of people can relate to that. Um, well, now I've been following you on Twitter for a little while. Before your book came out, we started following each other mutually.
Mhm.
Um, but for those that haven't been following you or don't know you, could you share a little bit of your story, just kind of who you are, how you got to where you are? Yeah, just a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, where should I start? My the, there's a lot to my story, as to everyone's story, I guess.
Yeah.
My dad was a drug addict and
Mm,
was from age 17 to 27 was lost in drug addiction and just an unhealthy life, and came to Christ through this hippy dippy Christian, born again Christian movement. And then so married my mom, and I was raised Christian. My dad's background was Jewish. uh, that's a part of the story that's on my mind lately because I've been writing about it. Um,
mm,
so yeah, so then I went to college at Tufts. I went to seminary at Gordon Conwell, and I was trying to figure out. Wanted to be in ministry, but couldn't really figure out what type of ministry.
mm,
So my 20s were kind of dipping my toes in different things, and then the in my early 30s, I kind of burnt out from ministry and went
mm,
back to nannying as a way to pay the bills,
mm.
which is something that I've been doing basically since I was 11 or 12. Um, and then all through that, I was also trying to write. So, working on short stories and trying to be a fiction writer. But after a while, realized that the journaling that I'd been doing every day my whole life was
Mm,
practicing creative nonfiction, and
mm,
I
mm.
realized I accidentally had become a decent nonfiction writer. So that's what I've been doing for the past few years. And then, like I talk about in my book, there was sort of the background to that all those years that I just mentioned, the depression and the migraines, and trying to figure out what was going on with that and what kind of treatment I needed.
Mm.
Um, So yeah, so for the past several years, I've been nannying and writing, and I just ended my last nanny job. Not my last ever, probably, but my last for a while. So I'm focused now on some writing projects.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And you're a great writer, so I'm glad you're focusing on that. I really
Thank
am.
you.
So I'm curious. Your book is really about a long night of depression and like getting through it,
Mhm.
like sitting with people in that. Um, I'm curious how your own experience with depression was embodied in your writing, whether it's your book or not, but how it sort of embodied itself in your writing and became something a little more, I guess, tangible rather
Mm,
than like the big cloud of depression that sits over us sometimes. It seems really ethereal.
right. Yeah, that's a good question. I think, well, part of it is that I did some of the writing while I was in the midst of depression,
Mm,
and I sort of described the emotional pain pretty vividly. But
mhm.
then I didn't write the book until several years after that major depressive episode that I read about, which was the worst of my life and the longest of my life. So I
Yeah,
kind of had that perspective, and also a, slightly more functioning brain at the time to
yeah,
be able to collate my experiences and to write about them with a little bit of perspective. So probably it's the combination of like real time writing and after the time writing that sort of flushes it out.
yeah. Do you think that having that sort of hindsight on it helped make it more human?
It's a good question. I don't know. I think if I'd been offered a book contract in the midst of it, I think
Hmm.
it still would have been a very human book, but it would
Hmm.
have been a more personal book. I think it would have been more about my own pain and
Oh, okay,
less about sort of trying to reach out to others. So I think that's what the distance gave me,
okay.
is that, I didn't want to just write a book. And I think many people, if not most people who are in depression, could write a book about it, right? I mean, it's
Hmm.
just like very intense experience. But I wanted to write something that was more reaching out and more like identifying. I can't say that word, identifying the universal in my experience and how
Yeah,
that universal could connect me to others.
yeah, yeah. That connection piece. I mean, I know from my own living with bipolar, that connection piece is huge. When you don't feel it, that's when things get kind of dangerous, I
Hmm.
feel. Um, in your own life, if you don't mind me asking, in your own life, how has that connection piece manifested itself?
That's another big question there. Um, I think I have always, I think, been on a search for connection and for community.
Mhm.
And in fact, in the time that I write about in my book, I was living in an intentional Christian community in Boston, which was four houses with about, at any given time, about 18 adults and various children. So, and I was there for 7 years. So that was a very intense in some really good ways and intense in some really bad ways
Yeah.
experience. And it covered that 7 years covered the time also that I burnt out in ministry. And so it was a lot of like, and then I left 5 years ago, I left the community. Um,
Hmm.
so in a lot of ways, it was like trying to find connection in
Hmm.
the context that I expected to find it, and then letting go of those contexts, the ministry and the church and the Christian community, but then finding connection in other unexpected ways in places that I didn't expect to find it, if that makes any sense.
No, no, it totally makes sense. It totally makes sense. You sort of have, I mean, we have these expectations, and sometimes the expectations let us down, but
Hmm.
we find what we're looking for in different places, or I should say, what we're looking for finds us.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Um, I'm curious. You call yourself a theologian, which I love. Um, how how does this stuff with connection and the embodiment of like living with this chronic condition of depression and migraines, I mean, how does it kind of intersect with, I guess, what does it do to your theology?
Mm. You're asking me really good, really big questions, Aaron. Yeah. Well, I think a couple things come to mind when you ask that. One is that I think a lot of the faith tradition that I was raised in and that I studied in seminary is it's very focused on the spiritual, obviously, and very focused on your mind,
Mm-hmm.
and it sort of leaves out your body. Like your body's just sort of there
Mm-hmm.
tagging along. Like everyone quotes that C.S. Lewis quote, you're how does it go? You don't have a soul, you are a soul, you have a body.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is very profound, Jack, but also our body is a part of us, and that's how we experience the world, and that's how we take in, through our senses, and also how we store memories and store trauma is in our
Mm-hmm.
body.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for me, it was really important to flesh out my theological training with experiences of the flesh, like yoga and
Mm-hmm.
meditation that involves your body and studying trauma, um, the learning about how trauma lives in your body,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing. And um, yeah,
Yeah.
that's, I don't know if I've gotten away from your original
No,
question
no,
there, but
no. That makes sense. That makes total sense.
yeah.
And there's my child again.
Hi, Atticus.
Yes, Atticus. Can you go eat lunch, buddy?
Is there a bed behind you or something? He looks like he's
There is.
falling onto.
No, he's
Okay.
not falling onto the ground. He's falling onto a bed. Hey, go eat your lunch. Go eat your lunch. Oh, jeez. Ow. This is how I embody my theology, is by playing with my children,
There you
because
go.
they don't let me not play. Hey, 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 hey. Can you go eat your chips? You smell them on your breath. Go eat your chips.
Mister, can you let Daddy have his call? Okay, Mister. No, Mister.
Yes, he is safe.
Mister.
Go on, buddy.
Hey. Apparently, Teddy wanted to join you.
That's okay. I'm done with my lunch. Okay. Now, no, your question totally answered it. I mean, the idea of good. I'm glad you're done with your lunch. That's good.
Okay. Why, buddy?
Can you go play your games?
Okay. Sorry.
It's okay. No, I love that idea of like moving into meditative practices and contemplative practices that engage your mind, but also involve your body in very real ways. And the idea of trauma living in you, the body keeping score,
Right.
and what it does to us. Um, just where I was talking with my therapist uh, last week. I don't know, sometime before now, and she was asking me. I was going through something. I was really feeling at the time, which is big for me. And she asked, where I feel it and where I felt the emotions in my body, where they sit.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm always curious, like the idea that the flesh is somehow bad or less than the spiritual, like the man of flesh versus the spiritual man, things like that.
Right.
How we sort of downplay those things in our bodies, but when something goes wrong in the body, it's almost like it's like um like a flare that goes up saying, I need attention here, and we can't really ignore it anymore.
Right.
um So what do you think
Yeah.
happens when when we have this community and something happens in our body that demands attention, what does that do to our relationships?
Mm. Yeah, another good, good big question. I think, yeah, the one really tricky thing about community is that it's not just a bunch of healthy people and one person who's having a struggle, right? It's like
Mm,
there's all of us are going through something in our own little lives. And what we're going through affects our ability to be perfectly, rational and reasonable in discussions
right,
with other
right.
people in our lives with other people. So I, you've got like, in my case, 18 adults with potentially like half of us in some kind of mild or moderate crisis at any given time.
Hmm.
That's like ideally the person who is struggling would have room to say, hey, everyone, I'm struggling. I need attention right now, or I need space, or,
Hmm.
and articulate their needs. And then the people who aren't struggling would gather around that person and help care for their needs.
Yeah.
But I've been thinking a lot about that, especially in the pandemic right now. I
Hmm.
think a, a greater percentage of us than usual are in crisis at any given time. And so a
Yeah.
lot of my conversations, like I'm used to talking to my friends, to having like a phone conversation with a friend and feeling better afterwards, just for the external processing and connection.
Hmm.
But now I I still enjoy talking to my friends, but it a lot of my conversations don't have that same sort of fulfillment. Like, well, we've walked each other through
Yeah.
and we feel better now. It's more just like you're you're experiencing trauma. Yeah, me too. It's hard. Yep. Okay. Talk to
We're
you
just gonna
soon.
commiserate together. This is
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, I
So there's
understand that.
less of the like, half or the larger percentage of healthy people or,
Hmm.
people who aren't currently in crisis helping the person who has a need. So, and I think that was my experience in my community as well for various reasons and has been my experience in a lot of different contexts.
Yeah.
I don't have a solution to that. I think my personal solution right now is to just take a lot take a big step back and take a lot of alone time
Yeah.
and sort of tend to my own needs for a while. Not that I don't still
Yeah.
have connections with people, but
No, no. I mean, sometimes you have to pay attention to yourself. You just
right.
do. Um, I'm curious
Yeah.
though, when we are in crisis, what are some ways that we can continue to sit with other people in crisis without, I mean, you mentioned, burning out in ministry and things like that. I think that's one thing
Yeah.
that happens in ministry is we have these things in our lives that are happening. I know this is how it was for me uh, in my 20s. Granted, my brain wasn't fully developed when I was going through this stuff because I'm in my early 20s, but something happens and we're still called upon to serve. We're still called upon to be there for other people. We're still called upon to um, I don't want to say perform, but we're still called upon to give. And how do we give when something's going on, like a pandemic, like a depressive episode, like whatever? How do we give without completely burning out our bodies?
Yeah. It's a good question. I mean, one thing I think is that we all have to get better at being honest with each other and articulating our needs and articulating what we can and can't give, you
Hmm.
know. And I think part of that is being honest with ourselves. Part of that is being is going to therapy doing the work to understand ourselves better and to know, like, is this really a gift that I have that I'm offering to people, or is this just something that I feel obligated to offer week after week, and it's burning me out because it's not the way that God created me. It's not, and even if you're good at something, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's something that you're supposed to be doing. That's something that, is going to make you thrive and make the people around you thrive. So I think it takes
say more about that. About just because you're good at something doesn't mean it's what you're supposed to be doing. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, a lot of this, I'll admit, I'm just sort of paraphrasing Henri Nouwen from his book, The Inner Voice of Love.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, he has a lot of really great insight that came out of his own really difficult time and therapy and a lot of really deep inner healing and inner work that he was doing. But I don't know, I think a lot, I don't know how to say this without sounding vain.
That's okay.
But like,
preface, you're not vain. That's okay.
Yes, okay. I think if you're a bright person, if you I think that you can be good at a lot of things, like it's you can I think a lot of people can be good worship leaders or good preachers or the but that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be doing all of those things that you're good at, because the purpose of the gifts that God has given us are not just to serve others, they're to serve ourselves and to fulfill our purpose in life.
Okay.
And so you could be a perfectly good music minister, to just pick an example, but if your true gift is to be an artist and you're spending all your time and energy on music ministry, then you're never creating the art that you were meant to create. Does that make any sense?
No, it does. I just never thought about the idea of like how we're being gifted to serve ourselves, and
Right.
not in a narcissistic way. Yes, Cameron. Again, my child. Not in a narcissistic way, but in a healthy way. Like I've never thought about that before. How when we embody what we care about, like art, like writing, like gardening, I mean, whatever it might be, when we embody what really makes us feel alive, how does that serve us?
I don't know. All that's coming to mind is like pieces of poetry.
That's
I guess
okay.
maybe because I'm a writer, but there's this Gerard Manley Hopkins poem about I think it's untitled. I think it goes by the first line as Kingfishers Catch Fire. And it's about how every creature, every being in the world, even rocks thrown into a body of water, has a purpose in life and embodies that purpose. And he says that they cry, "What I do is me, for that I came." So I think that's like a lot of us have been trying to fit ourselves into the mold of what we think a good person should be or what we think a good Christian should be. But we're losing track of who God created us to be, very specifically us, like God made you, Aaron. Yeah. God didn't just make, a bunch of random people to all fulfill the same role.
Okay. That makes sense. I mean, there's my child again. One of those days.
Yep.
I got
You
my
li-
shirt off.
You do have your shirt
I was
off.
Cause it's
gonna
hot
mention.
out there.
It is hot out there. Can you go back out there? No, go back out there, please. I don't want you climbing on me this time. Okay. I love that. I love that line. Say that again. The creatures say,
crying, "What I do is me, for that I came."
"What I do is me, for that I came."
Mhm.
I'm
You said that's
specifically now thinking of parenting,
yeah.
but I'm also thinking in terms of. Oops, you okay? Yeah, you're good. Can you go back out there so I can finish my conversation? Oh, I love my kid. But I'm thinking in terms of parenting. Sometimes what we are
Atticus?
is given to us.
Atticus?
It's not necessarily just something we're.
Atticus?
Can you go with mom, please? It's not something we're necessarily born with. Like I wasn't born a
I know I
parent,
slapped you in the butt.
Right.
That's because
but
you
at the
slapped me
same
first.
time,
Now get out and live in
this is what I am and what I'm given.
Right.
How do you think things that we are given? How do I phrase this? How do you
I know
think
what you mean.
things that we're given bring us alive?
Well, I think even within a role like a parent or a father, I think
Mhm.
there's a lot of freedom for like of course you have certain set responsibilities, but there's still a lot of freedom for you to be you within that, You're not going to be a parent the same way that someone else is going to be a parent. You're going to bring different experiences into your children's lives and different perspectives, and you're also going to teach them like how to be themselves by being yourself, which is going to look different for different families.
So what do you think about Instagram culture? About this whole idea of like Pinterest, like, here's the perfect birthday party that we pulled off for our child, and then the pressure that puts on other people that see it and then look around their house and they're like, oh my god, a tornado came through here. How do I
Yeah.
how do I make this organized? What sparks joy and get rid of things when my kids are freaking out and I'm running a podcast and my child is climbing on me? Like,
Yeah.
what do you think about that kind of culture and what it does to our sense of self expressed through what we're given?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a parent, so I can't really speak to things like
Sure.
wanting to have the perfect birthday party for my kids or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, Instagram is a weird place. I think I don't really I don't really follow a lot of the like influencer kind of people,
Mm-hmm.
but when I end up on their page, it's just so weird. It's like their whole purpose of being there is to create this image, and all the photos are like the same filter. And I was just looking at this page the other day, and a woman is like by her pool in all of her photos, and it's all like self-care, which I'm totally on board for self-care, but it seemed like that was really just how she spent her days lounging by the pool. So I don't know.
What do you think of the idea of curating a life versus building a life.
Mm. Yeah. You're an Enneagram 4 too, right?
I'm a 4-wing 5. Yeah.
4 with a 5 wing.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. That's what I am. Yeah, I think that's a big theme for Enneagram 4s is
Yeah.
that like we're trying to create a persona in the first part of our lives
Mm-hmm.
and trying different looks on, sort of trying on different skins.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to learn in the second part of our lives how to really be ourselves, not just to be ourselves by like expressing ourselves in a certain way.
Right.
Yeah, which is hard. It's almost like we're afraid that we don't have any true identity central to us. So it takes a little bit of like trust and a leap of faith to let go of the
Yeah.
persona and trust that you do have a real self that's going to catch you.
Do you think that's just an Enneagram 4 thing with the real self? Or do you think there's some sort of universal struggle with like who am I? Like that question.
Oh, I'm sure it's universal.
Yeah.
I think different types would probably express it differently.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like a 3s or 8s, I think, which are sometimes the hardest types for me to understand. Probably wouldn't put it in the same words
Right, right.
with that sort of like intense search for identity and meaning in our lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel like, I know this is true for me, and I'm just wondering, do you feel like the depression that sort of follows you around, that sort of nips at your heels, that's there, do you feel like that, yeah, I guess, do you feel like that helps you find your identity? Or do you feel like the depression and the chronic illness and the quote problems, or do you feel like those things sort of hinder you from finding your identity?
I think they help, to be honest,
Mm-hmm.
because I think I if I had less physical pain in my life and less drain on my energy in coping with
Mm-hmm.
them, I probably would have created a better persona. I would have created an ideal for my life in my 20s that was a little bit more robust.
Mm.
But depression sort of forced me to be honest with myself and like who I really am and the experiences that I've had and the trauma that I have, and
Mm.
to dig deep into the truth, because you can't get through therapy and depression by lying. You have to, it's like sobriety. You have to just be really honest
Yeah.
about what's going on emotionally. And yeah.
Yeah. That's
What do,
hard
what do you think?
sometimes. Well, I think you're right on. It's just really hard sometimes to be emotionally honest, and
Mm,
not because you don't necessarily want to face it, but because I know for me, growing up in a lot of toxic masculinity and things like that.
mhm.
Okay, I'll show you in just a minute. Um, I know for me, growing up in a lot of toxic masculinity and in evangelical patriarchy, I wasn't taught how to be honest with myself emotionally.
Mm,
So I, so that's one thing I've had to learn. I'm still learning in therapy is how to identify what I feel, where I feel it, how I feel it, to
yeah,
to actually be able to be that emotional honesty. Um,
right.
but I think you're right on. I think the idea of a thorn in the flesh, so to speak, does something to does something honest to us.
Yeah.
It kind of keeps us honest, because like I can only keep up a persona for so long before my mania takes over, or my depression bottoms out.
Hmm.
Um, I'm a lot more stable now than I used to be, but I still swing, and
Right.
that will. I mean, it's cost me jobs, it's cost me
Mm.
friendships, but it's kept me honest. Just
Yeah.
kind of being like, I can only do so much, and like, I think for me, it's helped me relinquish control.
Yeah.
Um, like I make my own decisions and I make my own life, but I'm not always in control of my own life, if that makes
Mm.
any sense.
Yeah, sure.
Hmm. Man, you give me a lot to think about. So
My
I want to ask you this.
yeah.
This is my favorite question to ask people. I love asking it. In light of everything we've talked about, depression, community, connection, honesty, trauma, um, not burning out, I mean, everything, not in light of all this, what does this do to your articulation of the gospel?
Mm. I think for me, my life has been a process of trusting God more
Mm,
about communicating with God's people and trusting and not trusting myself less, but lowering my role and my expectations that I'm going to be the one to say this is the truth, this is what you have to believe.
mm,
And I think that there have been sort of several times in my life when I realized that I was defensive, or I was fighting for something that I didn't need to, because God
mm.
could take care of God's self. I
Yeah,
didn't need to be arguing about this point of theology with this person, and if I lost the argument, that person wasn't going to go to hell and I wasn't going to be in trouble.
yeah,
And I think, going through a sort of deconstruction process with a lot of the things that have been tacked on to the gospel and the
mm,
traditions that I moved in when I was younger. And you can't be gay, or just a lot of like the gospel. Oh, and then also you have to follow this
right,
rule and fit into this category, and
yeah, yeah,
and sort of realizing that how how inaccurate that is, but also how it puts it puts God and it puts truth into boxes that they weren't meant to be in. And there's
mm,
a lot more freedom and a lot more joy than we that we can access without having to go through, other people having to jump through other people's hoops.
mm.
I don't
I love
know.
that. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
It really is. Well, Jessica, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure. I want to tell people about your book. Um,
Yeah.
it's called The Long Night. When you're in the midst of terrible depression, the days and weeks can feel like an eternity. So, this book is for those who are in the long night of depression. It does not promise healing or deliverance, which I love. It's not a guide for praying away the depression, which again, I love that it's not trying to do that. It's simply an attempt to sit next to you in the dark as while you wait for the light to emerge. Drawing on the wisdom of spiritual figures from the past and present, including Henry Nouwen, Thomas Merton, Barbara Brown Taylor, Bunmi
Bunmi Ladatan, I think.
Laditan. Thank you. I'm so bad with names. And many others. The Long Night is a comforting and inspirational companion for anyone in the midst of depression, and it really is.
Mm.
Writer, editor, and minister Jessica Kantrowitz has been where you are. Remember that as you go and look out at her book. She has been there. And as a mentor and a friend, she will walk with you on this journey towards life and light. If you do want to hang out with Jessica on Twitter, it's twitter.com JF I'm sorry, I'm going to mispronounce your name here. I
It's
apologize.
Kantrowitz. That's okay.
Kantrowitz, thank you. So JF Kantrowitz on Facebook, 10,000places.org, and on Instagram, Jessica Faith Kantrowitz. I will put all the links in the show notes so you can find her easily. Jessica, your wisdom and tenderness matter, and I appreciate you coming on and sharing those with me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aaron. This has been really good. Thank you.
Thank you.